Hello, thank you all for tuning into our Aircast tonight. My name is Jordan Toledo, and I am the coordinator for tonight's Aircast on the General Laws Committee. I am a senior at George Mason University, currently interning with Democracy on Air, a nonpartisan nonprofit that is supporting the Virginia On Air Governance and Election Hub at va.onair.cc. Tonight's Aircast is being live streamed and recorded. The recorded video will be archived on the Virginia On Air website and on our YouTube channel. Our host for tonight is Delegate David Bulova. David Bulova was first elected delegate for the 37th District in 2005. The 37th District includes the city of Fairfax and parts of Fairfax County. Delegate Bulova serves as chair of the General Laws Committee and chair of the Commerce, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Subcommittee in the Appropriations Committee. Additionally, he serves as a member of the Education Committee, Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources and Appropriations Committee. Now I'd like to welcome Delegate David Bulova. How are you doing tonight, Delegate?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here. I know you have a very busy schedule, but I look forward to hearing about all the great work your General Laws Committee has been doing. Can you give us an overview of the highlights from this winter's General Law Committee?
Yeah, no, and so thank you very much. It is wonderful to be here with you tonight. Before I give some highlights, I wanted to spend a little time just kind of talking about what we actually do. Because the term general law is kind of generic, right? And so from most of our sister committees, and there's 14 committees in the House, you can tell exactly what they do by their name. And so you've got the Education Committee, you've got Health, Welfare, and Institutions, and you've got Public Safety. But general laws is a little bit different in that we're a bit of a workhorse, and we deal with a whole range of different issues. In fact, I had to write them down because it's hard to go ahead or easy to go ahead and forget exactly all the issues that we cover. But just to give you a little bit of a flavor, we deal with alcohol, we deal with gaming, we deal with procurement, we deal with the Freedom of Information Act, we deal with the regulation of professions and occupations. So anything from a real estate agent to plumbers to cosmetology. If you are licensed as a profession in Virginia, we cover that area. We deal with the administration of government, housing, symbols of the Commonwealth. And so I bet people didn't know that we have a state amphibian. And so if you want to have a state anything, that goes through general laws. Conflict of interests, consumer affairs, and then anything that doesn't fit neatly in one of our other committees. And we even deal with cemeteries. And we had a bill last year that actually addressed whether a person could be buried with their beloved pet. And so that was a real bill. It was a little creepy. And the answer is yes, you may now do that. It is fun to note that General Laws is among the oldest of the committees in the entire General Assembly. It traces its roots back to 1677. And it was originally the Committee on Propositions and Grievances, and we changed our name to General Laws in 1901. So this last year, the whole House of Delegates, we met virtually, and that included our committees and our subcommittees. And so we did our job from home or wherever we wanted to go ahead and set up shop. But that did not keep us from addressing some really, really big issues. And so kind of your point, what are the things that we really focused on over the week or over the winter? So one of our biggest priorities was housing. And so, there's been a lot of tough parts about the pandemic, but we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can in order to keep people in their homes, while also realizing that a lot of people are relying on those rental income streams just to go ahead and pay for their own housing and their own businesses. And so it's walking that narrow line. And so we actually passed some really good legislation, I thought, in order to empower our renters to be able to engage in things like payment plans and to help them go ahead and keep in their homes, while also ensuring that ultimately the landlord is made whole. And so any of those kind of issues dealing with housing that came through our committee this year. Last year, we made a really big change to the Virginia Human Rights Act, and was very, very proud of what we did last year. It was landmark legislation that added our LGBTQ plus friends and neighbors to the Virginia Human Rights Act. and protected them in housing, in employment, and in public accommodations. And so this year we continued on that really, really good work by expanding protections to those with disabilities, and also closed a really big gap by making sure that we're covering domestic workers under those protections as well. So very proud of that. The biggie this year was the legalization and regulation of marijuana. And so we were ground zero of the committees that dealt with this. And so usually a bill goes to one committee, maybe two. If it deals with budgets, it goes to appropriations. This one was so big that it went to actually three committees. And so we deal with the regulation of substances. So we deal with alcohol, we deal with tobacco. And so we dealt with kind of that end, so how would we retail this? Then it went over to courts for enforcement and safety, and then over to appropriations to figure out how any revenue generation would be appropriated and spent. But we were ground zero. We were the first to have an opportunity to look at the governor's proposal and made lots of different changes. And we dealt with everything from how do you design a system to make sure that you're keeping it out of the hands of kids under the age of 21, to regulation of advertising. But the real big one was, how do you make sure that there's an economic equity aspect to this, right? And so you don't want just a couple of really big national companies coming in and gobbling up the entire market. You want to make sure that more people have an opportunity for an economic slice of that pie. And so that bill ultimately went through the House and the Senate and was adopted by the General Assembly. We had over 113 bills referred to our committee this year. Believe it or not, that's actually a little on the light side. We usually deal with even more of those. But the way that we deal with that many pieces of legislation is we've got a really robust subcommittee system. And so I've got 4 subcommittees that are in general laws. And I'm really, really glad to have 2 of my subcommittee chairs here with us today. And so that's Betsy Carr of Richmond. And so Betsy is the chair of our Open Government and Procurement Subcommittee. And then we have Chris Hurst, who is is out of Radford, and he chairs our Professions and Occupations Subcommittee. So anyways, they do a really, really great job. And so I wanted to kind of give them a chance to talk a little bit about what their subcommittees are all about, some of the big issues they've been facing. I know that this last year was a challenge because we had some really early subcommittee meetings. And so Delegate Carr, her subcommittees were at 7 o'clock in the morning. And Chris lucked out, his were in the afternoon. But anyways, Betsy, you want to tell us a little bit about what your subcommittee did this session and kind of the issues that you deal with?
Thank you. I think all of our participants got an early start, and they did very well. The members and also the people who might be testifying from Northern Virginia or Martinsville or wherever, they could just hop on Zoom. They didn't have to get in their car and drive down. So that was an advantage of having the Zoom. This session, we had a lot of, the subcommittee says, this deals a lot with procurement, and that's contracts, like contracts with state organizations, the labor relations, what are the different guidelines for contracts for procurement, what's put out there. So we have that, and we have FOIA, the public information questions and so forth that come forth. I think one of the questions that we were asked to talk about, should I go ahead and do that now? Or should we wait? The FOIA bill.
For the Q&A? I think why don't we wait till the Q&A session? Yep.
But I think our biggest thing were we had just a number of bills that had to do with contracts, procurements, and so forth, and that was our biggest time consumption. And also, I think people worked very diligently, and always it's a privilege to be involved in that committee and see all the folks that come together and provide input and really try to discern the best way forward for our committee.
Yeah, so Betsy, you all So speaking of procurement, you had a really big bill come through that passed the House, didn't quite make it out of the Senate, but I suspect we're going to see this again.
Yes, that was what I would say. They said, what do you want to see next year? And I would imagine we will see aspects of that being coming back again and trying to get through something definitely with that.
Yeah. So you want to describe maybe the issue? And so this deals with the governor's study showing that with state procurement that small and women-owned and minority-owned businesses are very underrepresented.
That's right. That's right. And so the
procurement.
SWAM group and so forth were very concerned about that. There had been a governor's executive order, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And so this bill was trying to codify that executive order and also include the findings of the diversity study, what had happened and why we had so many, why the numbers of contracts given to SWAM and business owners, women business owners, was so low. So it was an effort to correct that, move forward in a positive way.
Great. Thanks, Betsy. So Chris, tell us about professions and occupations and then the amorphous administrative processes aspect of what you do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for having me on. I think members of that subcommittee serve on it, and some get taken off of that subcommittee and still have no idea necessarily what exactly does administrative process mean. But I actually think there's a lot of overlap between that part of the subcommittee that I chair and also the procurement part that Delegate Carr chairs as well. And it's basically the legislative intent for how the executive branch will operate itself and some of the fundamental things we want to bring to the executive branch in order to have it reflect our values. So in the procurement process, as Delegate Carr was just saying, we're having this debate over the issue of making sure that if from a procurement standpoint, the state government is choosing to do business with groups that we think deserve to have additional opportunities, and we are trying to continue to encourage more people in those SWAM categories to start businesses and to hopefully have successful businesses. Groups of people that historically in the past have not been able to have access to entrepreneurship or their own ownership of small businesses. And so we have a huge, I think, influx of bills that have come in the last few years that are related to diversity, inclusion, and equity. And there are lots of things that we can do in state government, but then also in the administrative process subcommittee to have an effect on how the executive branch also operates, here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. There were a couple of ones that, for me, were big this year, and that was changing some definitions in the Virginia Human Rights Act. So some of those fundamental parts of Virginia code that, again, lay the groundwork for some of our value statements, things like the Human Rights Act are in there, and they're under the purview of administrative process. How does the administration actually go about, doing its job on a day-to-day basis? What sort of things does it have to adhere to? And one bill that had a lot of contention was expanding the definition of employer in the Human Rights Act to also include people who are employed as domestic workers, as defined in the bill. And so this is trying to make sure that you as an employee, you as working for someone else, are not going to be discriminated in your workplace. And we just were able to make changes to that here in the last few years based off of different protected classes, including, gender orientation, sexual identity. And what we also, I think, want to make sure is that we do a good job of identifying all the types of workers that really are working under an employer-employee relationship. And so not trying to say from tax purposes, are these people independent contractors or are these people employees? Do you have to give them benefits or not? It doesn't really say anything about that. It says, again, from a fundamental value statement, you're not going to be able to discriminate, fire, otherwise abuse in the workplace people, even if they're domestic workers working in your home. You're not going to subject them to that kind of discrimination and expect it not to be a violation of state law. So that was one of the major ones that we dealt with here in the Professions, Occupations, Administrative Process Subcommittee in 2021. The other one that we added too was adding a discrimination on the basis of disability to make sure that we did not include it in the legislation last year, that employers, housing, and other different types of situations that you might encounter in day-to-day life, that you can't be discriminated against, as we said, for your sexual identity or gender orientation, that you also can't be discriminated based off of disability too. The other part of it is on professions and occupations, and that is basically the licensure process and the oversight board process we have in Virginia for making sure that professional classes of people have some measure of regulation to ensure that the work that they're doing is of high quality. And the bill that everybody still talks about that we had was actually last year, and it was the chairman's bill. And sometimes it's what I like about general laws is we get to really have some debates about things that maybe you wouldn't have previously thought about, where you have opposing viewpoints. And sometimes we introduce these bills because we do have a particular feeling on them, but also because it's important for us to start to have some discourse on these issues to try and get some resolution. We still don't really have resolution on this one. And so for that, we're just going to keep the current standard the same, which says that if you want to be able to have a license to practice barbering or cosmetology, you have to have 1,000 hours of training in the field. If we were, the bill that was introduced would have prohibited us from having that requirement. And so here you had this battle of, if somebody is going to be doing procedures on your head and on your face, do you want them to have a certain number of hours that you have for training? Well, what is the purpose of having a set number of hours? And that's what we have in a lot of our code as it relates to regulation of professions and occupations. Is 1,000 enough? What about 900? Would 900 be enough? And so where do you try and find that right balance? It's never going to be a perfect number, but you have a number that is sizable, something like 1,000 hours, if you believe as a value that it's important to have a sizable amount of time dedicated in the field to practicing this before we're going to give you a license. But there is a strong argument to be made that maybe those are a little arbitrary. Maybe they don't actually truly reflect the ability or the talent of the people who are applying for these licenses. So these are continued questions that we have all the time in the General Laws Committee. As the chairman said, we're kind of the soup to nuts committee, but it's basically, a lot of it's conflict resolution for a lot of smaller groups of people that don't necessarily have a role in the education committee or in the healthcare committee, but they are in housing, or they're in a profession like cosmetology or a barber, or they are in funerals and cremation services, and doing different things like that. All of those kinds of different professions are things that can spill over into general laws.
Yeah. So one last question for both of you, and then we'll turn things over to Jordan to facilitate some of the questions we've got from our audience members. And so we are technically in session, depending on the year, either for 46 days or 60 days. But the work of the General Assembly really continues on throughout the year, right? We've got various committees and commissions that meet. So when you've got an issue that is important but not quite ready for prime time, you have an opportunity to work in the out years on that. And so I know for Betsy, we have something called the Freedom of Information Advisory Council. And oftentimes when somebody introduces a FOIA related bill, rather than trying to do that on the fly, we'll send that over to the FOIA Council, and they'll work through the issues and they'll come back to us with a recommendation. And Chris, I imagine kind of same thing with you is, when you run into sticky issues like you're saying, which is, what is the appropriate level of regulation for a profession or occupation? How do you work that out? When you're not under the stress of a very packed session. And so maybe each of you could talk a little bit about, how that works in the off year, who kind of gets involved in that, and, maybe one or two very big issues, that you see that are being worked on over the summer and into the fall in anticipation of the 2022 session.
It was mentioned earlier that a lot of times bills go through one or two committees, and I can bring up an instance right now. There are a couple of things that have come up through procurement and then general laws, where one issue was trying to have a consistent treatment of workers that work for state projects. And so we put something in the budget and some budget language during the special session, but this put together a work group, pulling together labor folks, DGS, contractors, everyone who might have issues having to do with procurement or particular projects and concerns that might have come up. And so we have that has been expanded because there were more stakeholders that needed to be involved. And so that is a work group that is continuing under our Secretary of Labor, Megan Healy. In addition, as you mentioned, there are a lot of things that are very complicated about procurement. And this session, we had a work group set up that it's going to be, again, a kind of a group that people can refer to, just like FOIA or so forth. They can have bills and issues go to this procurement study group workforce and have some of the details hammered out or looked at so that there's more understanding and more clarity for everybody on how that works. So those are two big issues that have come out of general laws, and very happy. I think that's really good work that people are moving forward, looking at those issues because they involve a lot of people and a lot of projects and a lot of state money and so forth. So very happy that we're moving forward in that direction.
Yeah. Thank you, Betsy. Those are big issues, with lots of stakeholder involvement needed to work through the details. How about you, Chris? Oops, Chris, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I think that we still have a lot of implementation to do for some of the diversity and inclusion legislation we've done that is reflective in state government. We also have created a lot of new offices in our state government, and the creation of those new offices and new positions has come through my subcommittee a lot of the time. And so I think that there's already been a discussion and trying to sort of put our arms around better creating these new offices and new positions and really their efficacy and value versus being able to, have some type of symbol or pat on the back for trying to achieve some goal or try to resolve some issue. But is it really by creating a new office or position that we do that, or is it by trying to achieve it through some alternative way? Now, I am one who has passed legislation to add an additional office to create a position in Virginia. It's the Office of Children's Ombudsman that reports directly to the governor. After we had continued issues of our local departments of social services not investigating certain claims against children and not really having an oversight mechanism in Virginia, right? So an unmet need where you have to have oversight. But we've done a lot of, I think, really good creations of offices. We did one on trying to merge together education and the workforce, creating that as an office to try and help streamline all of the stakeholders that have something to say about workforce development and education to make sure that we are, at least having a conversation about how we're going to prep our children for the careers of the future. We also created a position of a military spouse liaison to try and assist spouses of military families to be able to enter into a new community if they are stationed in Virginia and are moving elsewhere, and then to also assist them if they are going to be leaving Virginia to be stationed somewhere else. So these are all really good things that we've done. I think, though, that what we don't want to do is set a huge precedent that every single bill that wants to seek the creation of one of these offices is inherently, just going to be added to state government and the executive branch.
Great, thank you, Chris. And before we turn it back over to Jordan for the questions, it looks like you've been joined by a guest behind you, so you've got to make an introduction.
Oh, that's Emily. So she's have a little cameo here. Yeah, we don't have anything else.
Thank you for joining us
here, so we're still waiting for furniture to arrive. So
perfect. All right, Jordan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you. I would like to thank all three delegates, not only for your participation in civic engagement, but for opening up this discussion and adding transparency to these committees that are so essential to Virginia politics. I know myself and every one of the participants and also the public is going to walk away with a wider breadth of knowledge of the bureaucratic system of Virginia local politics. So thank you all three. And now I would like to introduce the audience questions. I will begin with our first question, and this question is for all three delegates. This question is from Megan Ryan, the Executive Director of the Virginia Council for Open Government.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and Chairs Carr and Hurst. Thank you for letting me participate. I'm not going to ask a FOIA specific question, though that is my usual bailiwick. My question is about what might be done to cut down on the number of bills that are left in committee, not just yours, but other committees, without having received any kind of hearing.
Yeah, no, thank you, Megan. And I'll let my two subcommittee chairs join in as well, but it's a really important question. And number one, let me thank you for your advocacy. You have just been an enormous asset to the General Assembly with respect to making sure that it's an open and transparent process. So thank you for that. And I also agree 100%, that when possible, you want every single bill to get a fair hearing. You might disagree with that bill and that bill might die, but let it die or get an up or down vote on its merits. This year was a little bit of a challenge, as you know, because we were dealing in a virtual world and we were dealing with something called a block system for those people who are watching, where back before the pandemic, you would have a meeting that would start at 7 o'clock in the morning and you would just plow through until all of your bills were addressed. And so time wasn't as big of a concern if you weren't able to get through a docket. Unfortunately, this year, we had to deal with very specific 2-hour blocks of time. And the way that the system works is that if you're not done in your 2-hour block, Zoom stops, and then anything that is not dealt with doesn't get dealt with. And so we had to make some strategic decisions about making sure that your bills that had the most chance of being able to get through, or the ones that were likely to have the greatest amount of debate, that those were on the docket, so that we could make sure that we got through those. And so unfortunately, in that case, you had to look at a bill and say, all right, this bill isn't likely to go anywhere or isn't quite ready for prime time. But in general, Megan, I agree 100% with you that when we get back to normal, we want to make sure that every bill gets a fair hearing, because every member of the General Assembly represents our constituents and their voices deserve to be heard. Anyways, Chris and Betsy, I don't know if you wanted to add on to something.
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Delegate. No, go for it.
I was just going to say, some people have said that having a limit on the bills was a handicap, but I also think in some ways people had to pare down their issue. I mean, I had several things I wish I could have introduced this time, but could not because of the limit. But in some ways, because we had a limited number of bills, that we could hone and focus more. Now, I don't know, that's something we want to do in the future, but it's something we can learn from, I think.
Yeah, and just to add on to that before Chris takes over, typically on our long sessions, there's no limit to how many bills that people can introduce. In short sessions, we usually in the House, I think, have a limit of 15 bills, if I understand, or if I remember correctly. This year, we self-imposed a limit of 7, realizing again that time was going to be short. It doesn't help when you do have members who introduce dozens and dozens of bills, because it does clog up the system, right? And so, again, realizing that we only have a certain amount of time to get the people's business done, there was a certain beauty to making sure that people were prioritizing what bills they put in so that we could actually pay good time and attention to them. Chris?
Yeah, I think that there just needs to be a distinction for those bills that sometimes are intentionally not given a hearing by, and this has happened over the decades in Virginia that aren't scheduled for a hearing because they are particularly thorny. There may not be an actual plan for implementation, especially if these are going to have large fiscal impact. And so those, I think, don't get a hearing for those particular reasons. But then you also have really frivolous, unnecessary, sometimes only for political stunts, a category of bills that try and achieve that. And I don't know whether, I guess because everybody is duly elected to serve their constituents, that's whom they choose. So they have every right to be able to introduce legislation to do whatever they want to do. But is it going to help contribute to, I think, a robust discourse? I think is part of the consideration. So for me, it just underscores the fact that I had no idea how much in Virginia. It's not like DC, and we do hear the vast majority of all bills, do get a hearing, which is not the case in DC. So that's at least some benefit. But that just like baseball and football, there is a rule book, and just like baseball and football, sometimes it's a contact sport in the General Assembly, and so trying to figure out how to play that sport, it requires you to have different abilities, different tools in the toolbox, different options available to you as you're trying to run plays, as you're trying to get into the end zone, and so. I think that there's definitely opportunity to talk about, making changes to how we do business, to maybe take away some strategic advantage that some groups of people may be able to get, but that overall not having hearings on bills hurts the transparency of the process that we do. So we have our own committee on rules just to talk about some of these things and talk about particularly thorny issues. But just like making a change to a major sport, you have to go through a huge process and generally get to some sort of compromise. And if we really wanted to go down that road on this particular issue, I think that clever people, creative people could come up with ways where maybe we could improve the system in some type of compromise.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan Ryan, for your question. And thank you, delegates, for your honest answers. Next, I would like to introduce our second question for Delegate Bulova from Nanaya Obeng, who is a senior international politics major at GMU, as well as a Democracy On Air intern.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? So my question is, how have the universities addressed HB 1529 in promoting greater transparency for donations?
Great. So thank you for that question. It's an issue near and dear to my heart. House Bill 1529 was my piece of legislation, and it was born out of an unfortunate situation at George Mason University, where they went back and looked at donation agreements and discovered that there were some agreements that stepped over the bounds with respect to influencing the academic decision-making process. And so things that, with looking at them now, you'd say, hey, those shouldn't have been approved. And so the question was, how do you make sure that you don't repeat that kind of situation in the future? And so we're working with Megan's group and a number of other groups, as well as our colleges and universities. We passed a bill that basically said, look, every college and university has to have a gift acceptance policy, and you have to have some kind of administrative process that is open and transparent if you have a gift that is going to affect the academic decision-making process, or if the gift is $1 million and over and establishes or puts on a new obligation to a college or university. And so if you've got a new chairmanship or anything like that, there has to be a process for vetting that through. And I think the most important part is that process is subject to the Freedom of Information Act, right? And so, we trust but verify. And so you want to make sure that you got that sunshine and transparency so that anybody could go ahead and take a look at that process and say, yep, it's working, or no, it's not working. So I know George Mason University, they had actually gotten that ball rolling ahead of time to address that situation. And so they tackled the law and have come up with a policy and a process for accepting gift policies. My understanding is that other universities have done exactly the same thing. Each of them is a little bit different. And I think that was one of the concerns, is that, William and Mary's policy versus James Madison versus UVA and VCU are all going to be a little bit different with respect to how they're going to process those, but the foundational parts are all the same. And by law, each of those universities have put together their processes and procedures so that, again, we can make sure that there is transparency to the process, while also realizing that, we very much appreciate the fact that people are willing to make donations to our colleges and universities because it really is fundamental to their being able to perform their missions. But we as a public body, because these are public universities, want to make sure that there's no undue influence, and that it's the academics that is first and foremost with respect to our colleges and universities. So great question. Glad we were able to get that through, and glad our universities are implementing that program now.
Thank you, Delegate Bulova. Thank you, Nanaya, for your participation and your question. I would like to introduce our third question for Delegate Carr and Delegate Hurst from Todd Gillette, who is the Democracy on Air Chair and also holds a PhD from George Mason.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. And thank you, delegates. I've actually really been enjoying this discussion, really informative, really interesting. So my question is related to the Freedom of Information Act bills. And I'm interested to hear your views on those bills that were passed this year. Noted that there were HB 1931 that expanded the use of virtual meeting attendance in certain cases, and HB 2004 that expands the required release of certain information for criminal investigations. And just also, in case you have any issues that you're interested in taking on in 2022, I'd be curious to hear that.
Thank you. I'll just mention, since 2004 was Delegate Hurst's bill, and let him take the floor on that one. The 1931 bill, which passed the House uncontested and then passed the Senate 28-11. And it was a bill that was recommended by the FOIA Council, and it had the support from the Virginia Municipal League and the Virginia Association of Counties. Basically, if a member of a public body cannot come to a physical meeting due to a family member's medical condition that requires the member to provide care for them, then the member can notify the chair of the public body, and then they can participate in the meeting electronically. Also, the bill clarifies that members can participate in an electronic meeting due to a personal matter up to 2 times or 25% of the meetings each calendar year. So this was a balance of allowing people to take care of their personal responsibilities and take advantage of virtual meeting. At the same time, not letting it go so far that people could just go the whole time and do virtual meetings. However, we have to add, during the pandemic, that has been a kind of helpful thing during this time. And that will change when we no longer have the state of emergency. But I think we all realize and recognize the advantage of having virtual meetings for community meetings, for board meetings, and so forth. So particularly my view on this is that prior to the passage and introduction of this legislation, and also prior to the pandemic, restrictions on attending a public meeting virtually for a member of a board, I think were too restrictive, and they didn't recognize the various family members that individuals have, particularly for women. And so I was very glad to see this recommendation for you, the FOIA Council pass the General Assembly, and I think it's a really good move.
Thank you.
Great. And I know Delegate Hurst, there he is.
Sorry, I'm almost now used to meeting virtually. I had to go stop the dryer so it wouldn't buzz, give my response. Okay.
You were the sponsor of House Bill 2004, and I know this is a pretty big, important piece of legislation with some significant ramifications. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Todd, for the question. Again, in general laws, we really have to debate and consider some fundamental questions and values for how government is going to operate with its citizens. And what had currently been law and precedent in Virginia is that criminal incident information. So when a criminal incident actually occurs, that there would be some basic who, what, when, where, that could be released to the press or to individuals so that people know in real time, at least that something has happened, with maybe a sentence or two of information and not much more than that. Then you have criminal investigative files that can go all the way from origination through prosecution, sentencing, and the appeals process, and then ultimately become closed. And the question is what do you do with those closed case files that are no longer active? And in Virginia, the code said that they sometimes can be released to the public for examination and review, but only under the discretion of law enforcement. And so if that law enforcement agency decides that they don't want you to have it for really any reason, they don't have to give you that closed criminal investigative file. And we thought that it was important for us to advocate for legislation that would change that paradigm in Virginia, because I believe that the public has a right to see these completed case files, that ultimately the casework that is done by these investigators is done on behalf of victims and their families seeking to get justice, but it's also on behalf of the state and the people that represent the state, meaning that we should have a right to be able to see what they're doing and how they're doing it, and if they're being effective, and if they're doing the kinds of things that we as society believe that law enforcement should be doing. And also too, as Virginia has ended the death penalty, which happened this year, the question is do we have, one of the main motivators to get rid of that is the fact that there are people who are wrongfully convicted who are currently incarcerated. And sometimes they even are given death sentences too. And in Virginia, how are we able to figure out and understand who may have had one of those wrongful convictions? Well, a huge avenue for people to seek justice in that route is through reviewing the case files and seeing if there are discrepancies. And then also too, in an age where so much interaction is captured on body camera video, and anytime there's an officer involved shooting, it becomes a matter of community concern, that we want to make sure that once those investigations are closed and completed, that again, the public has a right to review that. Now, at the federal level, we are adopting largely now in Virginia what is already done for federal criminal investigative files by groups like the FBI. And what they have is a certain number of tests to say, well, it still could be exempted from disclosure, not have to be given to the public if it meets a certain number of different variables, that it might disclose the identity of someone who's confidential, that it might unwarrantedly invade somebody's privacy, that it might jeopardize a potential investigation. These are all things that we put into the legislation, I think, as proper guardrails. But we were able to change the value statement in our code as it relates to criminal investigative files by saying that once they are closed, no, the deference should be, the presumption should be that the public should get it, rather than it being up to the whim and the decision of the people who hold those records, the people who actually did the investigations themselves.
Great. Yeah. And thank you, Chris. Now, if I could just add, if I recall, this is a great case study of, you had introduced this previously, didn't make it through, and we had the process in there, and you worked with the stakeholders to be able to modify it, and then ended up getting it through the General Assembly, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to resist the process when appropriate, but then to also embrace the process when appropriate. And this one really actually was a huge benefit, because we introduced something. I used to be a reporter before I got into elected office. And so I have a lot of experience in this exact thing. And to be clear, this was not done for the press, it was done for the public, but that the press has a huge nexus in seeking these criminal investigative files a lot of the times. And so I felt pretty confident that what we had was good policy when it was introduced in the special session we had in the fall. And it got out of the House and made its way over to the Senate. But we have a process, and the chair of the FOIA Council is also on the General Laws Committee in the Senate, and asked that it be sent to her FOIA Council for review before the Senate could give a sign off to it. And you think at the time, oh man, this is just impeding progress. But actually going through 2 many hours long meetings of the FOIA Council in the fall gave us a better product. We were able to wordsmith it. We were able to debate certain conditions in the bill, we were able to try and edit it so that it's cleaner in the code too. So there are lots of things that process can afford us to actually create good code. I think in Virginia in particular, I see a lot of folks, especially the attorneys who help us physically write the bills. We want to make sure that we're good writers too, that we write good code, that it's only an idea. Only the bill, though, is what turns into law. And so the words matter. And so the process can oftentimes be very effective in getting us better legislation.
Yeah. And what Chris was talking about, he mentioned he was a reporter. And it really highlights, one of the neat things about the General Assembly is that we are part-time, and each of us comes with our own professional background and experience, and we come to rely on each other for that background and experience and perspective. And so we have a really diverse group of individuals with a lot of different professional backgrounds, and that really adds to that discourse and understanding of the issues that we're dealing with.
Great, thank you, delegates, and thank you, Todd, for your question. Lastly, I'm going to introduce our last question for all three delegates from Dr. Meredith Carey, who is a Virginia psychologist, a Virginia resident, and one of Delegate Bulova's constituents.
Well, hello, and I'm really here not to ask a question, but just to express very deep appreciation for great work that you all did when you enacted the legislation that allowed for telepsychology, because I must tell you, that has been a problem for 20 years, 2 decades, that we've known that telepsychology works really well to get out mental health services to people that are underserved, that can't get the services elsewhere. And we've just not had a way to be able to figure out how to get it across state lines because of the licensure problem. And somehow you all figured it out. And when you enacted that legislation, that means that any licensed psychologist from any of the other states can provide telehealth psychology to any Virginian for any reason. And that is just a fabulous, fabulous service. I hope you understand what a monumental contribution you all made. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carey. And I guess out of necessity, we had to use technology in order to be able to deliver services. And what we're discovering is that in many cases, you break down barriers and you wonder why you didn't do that previously. And so glad we were able to make that happen.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Carey, and thank you, delegates, once again. And just to close, thank you, Delegate Bulova, for hosting our Aircast, and thank you, Delegates Carr and Hurst, for your participation. I hope you found this Aircast interesting and our Virginia On Air Hub informative and engaging. And thank you, audience, for your great questions.
Thank you, Jordan, for having us. Thank you. It's such a delight and special privilege to be part of Chairman Bulova's team and continually learning, and so glad to have this opportunity to be able to share with you. And thank you for hosting and creating this. I really appreciate your work with this and just getting the word out to our citizens so everybody can understand a little bit more, including ourselves.
What Madam Chair said, thank you very much, Jordan, for hosting and for all of the wonderful questions we had. And just would like to say that I think we have the best chairman in Chairman Bulova for an entire committee. It really lets us kind of have some free roam to run around with our subcommittees, considering how diverse the subject matter can be. So he's a great point guard to have, making sure we're all in good position. So it's a fun committee to be a part of, for sure.
Great. And thank you, Chris. That was very kind of you. And I really appreciate the hosts for this Aircast. Also, thank you so much for our audience members for those really, really good questions. And I count my lucky stars every day that I've got such fantastic subcommittee chairs. It really is a very, very fun committee to work on. We deal with a lot of really, really important issues that touch the lives of people throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'll just end by saying, this is our democracy. Virginia has the oldest representative democracy in the New World. I think we're second oldest on the entire planet. And so we have to protect and nurture that. The pandemic was really tough on families and individuals and businesses, but it did force us to better utilize technology, as Dr. Carey went ahead and said. And so one of the outcomes is that it used to be, in order to be able to testify before a subcommittee or for a full committee like general laws, is that you had to make that trek down to Richmond for 5 minutes of testimony and then make the trek back home. And we went ahead and changed that. So now that if you see an issue that's important to you, you can sign up online and you can testify doing that virtually. And that's one of the things that we want to be able to preserve and keep even as we come out of the pandemic. And so I think that's great that, we'll do our business in person in Richmond, but we'll also empower people to participate in their democracy by being able to join online. And as we mentioned, there are a lot of issues that, again, important issues aren't quite ready. And so throughout the year, we focus on those and we refine them. And there's lots of opportunities for people to get involved, whether that's the FOIA Council, another group that we didn't get to talk about, but is also a really important part of general laws, is the Housing Commission, dealing with housing affordability type issues. And so again, it's an open invitation to everybody to please get involved. Please use this all as a resource. And again, thank you so much to our hosts tonight for putting this on. Of
course, thank you. And just to let you know, for the audience, I will be doing an upcoming demo about the Virginia On Air website so that you could read more about the General Laws Committee, as well as Delegate Bulova, Delegate Carr, and Delegate Hurst. The homepage highlights what's streaming today and the upcoming Aircasts. Other homepage posts are accessible by selecting the thumbnails below. For example, this post on the General Assembly has links to all the recorded sessions, as well as various articles about this year's session, and all the bills passed this year by interest and issue areas. To learn more about the General Laws Committee and other Virginia House committees, select Governance, VA House Committees, Top Posts, and then view the committee you are interested in. Select the feature image or post title to go to its post view. Committee posts include recorded committee hearings, detailed listing of all the bills passed by a committee, and commissions and boards related to a committee's lawmaking. You can learn about your representatives by selecting Who Represents Me, then typing in your street address, and then selecting your representative. In this post, you can learn more about our host tonight, Delegate David Bulova, his political experience, his positions on issues, and you can also ask questions, make suggestions, give endorsements, and make comments on topics of interest to you. Go to va.onair.cc to learn about, discuss, and get more engaged with Virginia governance and elections. Select the VA logo to subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the About US On Air Network video to learn more about our 50 state hubs and central us.onair.cc hub. Thanks for making your democracy better, and have a nice evening.